Chapter 1. The Medic and the Monster. The cold, metallic clang of the prison door echoed through the cavernous detention facility as Dr. Elias Kane was shoved inside. His captors, the reptilian Zalrin, muttered harsh commands in their guttural tongue, though he didn't need a translator to understand their disdain. Humans were pests to them, an upstart species in a galaxy dominated by ancient, war-hardened empires. Elias, however, was no ordinary human. A former combat medic with the Terran Alliance, he had served in some of the bloodiest interstellar conflicts humanity had ever faced. His skills had saved countless lives, both human and alien. But now, stripped of his tools and surrounded by hostile Zalrin guards, he had only his wits to rely on. "Get in there, human," one of the guards growled, shoving him forward. Elias stumbled, but caught himself before falling. He turned to glare at his captors, noting the smirks on their scaled faces. "What? No pillow mint?" he muttered dryly. The guard snarled and slammed the door shut behind him. The force sent a metallic reverberation through the cell. The air was damp and thick with the acrid scent of rust and something else, something musky and almost organic. As the sound of the guard's boots faded, Elias took stock of his surroundings. The cell was vast, far larger than he had expected. Chains hung from the walls, their lengths thick enough to hold a starship anchor. The floor was uneven, with deep gouges carved into the metal, as if something massive had clawed at it in frustration. And then he saw it. In the farthest corner of the cell, hidden in the shadows, lay a creature unlike anything Elias had ever encountered. Its body was enormous, coiled like a serpent, with scales that shimmered faintly even in the dim light. Massive wings were folded tightly against its body, and a long tail flicked lazily, scraping against the floor with a sound that made Elias's teeth ache. Its head, resting on crossed claws, was crowned with a series of jagged, horn-like protrusions. A dragon. A real, honest-to-God dragon. Elias stared, his mind racing. Dragons were the stuff of myths. Tales whispered in hushed tones about the Zalrin's ultimate weapon. They were supposed to be mindless killing machines, bred and conditioned to wreak havoc on the battlefield. But this one didn't move. Its breathing was labored, its body trembling slightly with each exhale. As a medic, Elias had seen those signs before: injury, malnutrition, exhaustion. It was dying. A dangerous observation. Instinct took over. Elias inched closer, his movements slow and deliberate. He had no illusions about what this creature could do if it perceived him as a threat. One swipe of those claws, and he'd be little more than a smear on the wall. But he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. The dragon's scales, though vibrant, were marred by scars and fresh wounds. One of its wings was bent at an unnatural angle, and its sides were gaunt, the outlines of its ribs visible beneath the scales. Elias crouched a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the creature's face. Its eyes were closed, but he could see the flicker of movement beneath the lids, rapid, erratic, as if it were caught in a restless dream. "Hey," he said softly, his voice steady despite the situation. "Can you hear me?" The dragon's eyes snapped open. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. The eyes that met his were a deep, molten gold, filled with an intelligence that sent a chill down his spine. This was no mindless beast. The dragon let out a low growl, its body tensing. Elias raised his hands slowly, palms out. "Easy," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dragon's growl deepened, but it didn't attack. Instead, it watched him, its gaze piercing. Elias took a slow, deliberate breath. "You're injured," he said, gesturing toward the dragon's bent wing. "That looks bad. And you're breathing. It sounds like you've got fluid in your lungs. Infection, maybe?" The dragon's tail lashed, striking the floor with a resounding thud. The force rattled the chains on the walls, but Elias didn't flinch. If anything, the creature's reaction confirmed what he suspected. It was in pain. "I'm a medic," he continued, keeping his tone calm. "I can help you." The dragon's eyes narrowed. It let out a low, rumbling growl that reverberated through the cell. The sound was neither hostile nor welcoming, it was a warning. Elias took the hint and backed off slightly. "All right, I get it. You don't trust me. But if you keep this up, you're not going to last much longer." The dragon huffed, a plume of warm air escaping its nostrils. It settled back down, its massive body curling protectively. But its eyes remained fixed on Elias, watching his every move. A silent agreement. Hours passed. Elias sat against the far wall, his mind racing as he tried to formulate a plan. Without tools or medicine, there was little he could do for the dragon's injuries. But he couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Eventually, hunger forced him to act. The Zaurin had left a small tray of food in the cell, a slab of unidentifiable meat and a chunk of stale bread. Elias ignored the meat and nibbled on the bread, his thoughts drifting to the dragon. Its wounds weren't healing on their own. That much was clear. But if he could get close enough, maybe he could clean the worst of them, stop the infections from spreading. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The dragon watched him as he approached, its molten eyes following his every step. Elias moved slowly, his hands visible. When he was within arm's reach, he stopped and knelt. "Look," he said, holding out the bread. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing." The dragon's nostrils flared as it sniffed the offering. Then, to Elias's surprise, it lowered its head and took the bread delicately between its teeth. It swallowed in a single gulp, then huffed softly, as if acknowledging his effort. Elias smiled faintly. "See? Not so bad." The Zaurin's underestimation. Outside the cell, Zaurin guards monitored the scene with growing disbelief. The dragon, which had resisted every attempt at taming, was tolerating the human's presence. It had even accepted food from him, a gesture the guards couldn't comprehend. "He's just a weak Terran," one guard muttered, his scaled face twisted in confusion. "How is he still alive?" Another guard shrugged. "Doesn't matter. The dragon will kill him eventually." But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that wasn't going to happen. Instead, Elias and the dragon seemed to form an unspoken bond. The human tended to its wounds as best he could, using scraps of cloth and water provided by the guards. And though the dragon remained wary, it allowed him closer each day. A revelation. One night, as Elias was cleaning a deep gash along the dragon's side, the creature let out a low, rumbling sigh. Its voice, deep and resonant, echoed in his mind. "Why?" Elias froze, his hands trembling. He looked up, meeting the dragon's gaze. "Did you just talk?" The dragon huffed. "I speak, as you do. Answer me. Why do you help?" Elias swallowed hard. "Because it's what I do. I'm a medic. I save lives." The dragon studied him for a long moment. Then it spoke again, its voice tinged with bitterness. "You are not like the Zaurin." "No," Elias said firmly. "I'm not." The dragon's tail curled tightly around its body. "They have made me a weapon, broken my body, my spirit. Yet you mend." Elias placed a hand gently on the dragon's uninjured flank. "You're not a weapon," he said. "You're more than that." The dragon's eyes softened, and for the first time, Elias saw a flicker of hope in their molten depths. Chapter 2. The Bond. The days stretched into weeks, though time seemed to blur in the cold confines of the Zaurin detention facility. The guards rarely interfered anymore, their curiosity turning into uneasy fascination as Dr. Elias Kane continued to interact with the creature that had been their greatest weapon, their deepest fear. The alien dragon, Vorith, was no longer the snarling, injured beast Elias had first encountered. Its wounds, while not fully healed, had improved under his care, and its molten gold eyes no longer gleamed with hostility. There was trust now, fragile but undeniable. Elias sat cross-legged on the cold metal floor, his back resting against the wall. Vorith lay nearby, its massive body coiled like a serpent, its breathing steady. The dragon had begun to speak more frequently, its voice resonating in Elias's mind like a deep, ancient echo. "You should not be here," Vorith said suddenly, breaking the silence. Elias looked up from the makeshift bandage he was preparing. "No kidding," he replied dryly. "Getting thrown into a cell with a mythical creature wasn't exactly on my to-do list." Vorith's tail flicked lazily, the sound reverberating through the chamber. "You misunderstand. You do not belong here with them." The last word was laced with venom. Elias frowned. "The Zaurin, you mean?" Vorith let out a low rumble. "They are cowards and deceivers. They broke me, bound me, turned me into their weapon. And now they discard you. as they do all things they deem unworthy. Elias nodded slowly. He had pieced together enough from his interactions with the guards to know that the Zalrin viewed humans as insignificant, a species barely worth their notice. But what Vorith said confirmed something deeper, something darker. "Why do they keep you here?" Elias asked. "Why not use you?" Vorith's molten gaze turned distant. "Because they fear me." The chains that bind. Elias set the bandage aside, leaning forward. "Fear you? They've got you locked up like some kind of prize. What's stopping them from unleashing you on their enemies?" Vorith's claws scraped against the floor, the sound sharp and grating. "I am no longer useful to them. The bindings they placed upon me, chains of pain and obedience, are failing. My will is stronger than their machines, and they know it." Elias's stomach turned. The idea of forcing such a powerful creature into servitude was horrifying enough, but the Zalrin's method inflicting pain and suppressing willpower was beyond cruel. "They plan to use me one last time," Vorith continued, its voice a low growl. "A final act of destruction before discarding me. But I refused. So they left me here, to rot." Elias stood, his jaw tightening. "You don't deserve this. Nobody does." Vorith tilted its head, its gaze sharp. "Why do you care, human? Your kind sees me as a monster, just as theirs does." "Because I've seen enough suffering to last a lifetime," Elias said firmly. "And because you're not a monster, Vorith. You're a prisoner." For a long moment, Vorith was silent. Then, slowly, it inclined its massive head in what could only be described as a gesture of acknowledgement. An unexpected revelation. As the days passed, Elias and Vorith began to share more of their stories. Elias spoke of his time as a war medic, of the lives he had saved and the horrors he had witnessed. Vorith, in turn, recounted its origins, a life spent soaring over alien skies, free and unbound, before the Zalrin had captured and enslaved it. "They came to my world," Vorith said one evening, its voice filled with sorrow. "Destroyed my kin, my home. I was the last to fall." Elias clenched his fists. "Why? What did they want from you?" Vorith's eyes burned with anger. "Power. My kind were warriors, guardians of the stars. The Zalrin saw us as tools to be used, weapons to be wielded." Elias exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The Zalrin's conquest of Vorith's species mirrored countless other atrocities committed by galactic empires. But this was different. The bond forming between him and the dragon felt personal, as though their fates were intertwined. A disturbing discovery. One night, as Elias sat alone in the cell, the door hissed open. Two Zalrin guards entered, dragging a crate of supplies. They exchanged a few terse words before departing, their gazes lingering on Elias with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. Elias approached the crate cautiously. Inside, he found the usual rations and medical supplies. But buried beneath the surface was something unusual, a small, handheld device covered in alien symbols. "What is this?" he muttered, pulling it free. Vorith stirred, its massive head rising to peer at the device. Its molten eyes narrowed. "A control module? For what?" "The chains," Vorith said, its voice a low growl. "That device can strengthen the bindings or disable them." Elias's heart skipped a beat. He studied the device, its surface cold and unyielding. Why would they send this here? Vorith's tail lashed, the sound sharp. "It is a warning, a reminder of their power." Elias's grip tightened on the device. Or a mistake? A dangerous choice. Elias spent hours studying the control module, its intricate design both alien and strangely intuitive. He didn't have the expertise to fully understand its workings, but he recognized one key feature, a failsafe, buried deep within the interface, that could deactivate Vorith's bindings entirely. "It's risky," he said, glancing at Vorith. "If I mess this up, it could make things worse." Vorith's gaze was steady. "I would rather die free than live as their puppet." Elias swallowed hard. The decision weighed heavily on him. If he freed Vorith, the Zalrin would undoubtedly retaliate. But leaving the dragon in chains was unthinkable. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do this." The turning point. Elias activated the module, his fingers moving deftly over the controls. The device emitted a faint hum, its symbols glowing as it interfaced with the bindings embedded in Vorith's body. The dragon let out a low rumble, its massive frame trembling as the chains reacted. "Almost there," Elias muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. The module beeped sharply, and Vorith let out a deafening roar. The chains around its body glowed bright red before shattering, the sound reverberating through the cell like thunder. Vorith reared back, its wings unfurling to their full, magnificent span. "I am free," it growled, its voice filled with a mix of triumph and fury. Elias staggered back, his heart pounding. "Now what?" Vorith's golden eyes fixed on him. "Now we fight." Chapter 3. The Escape. The roar of Vorith echoed through the Zalran detention facility, a sound so powerful it shook the walls. The shattered chains lay scattered across the cell floor, their broken links glowing faintly in the dim light. Dr. Elias Kane stood frozen for a moment, his breath caught in his throat as he stared at the now unbound dragon. The transformation was immediate. Where Vorith had once been subdued and trembling with pain, the dragon now stood tall, its wings unfurled to their full, awe-inspiring span. Its molten gold eyes blazed with fury and renewed strength. Elias found his voice. "Vorith, we need to move. The Zalran won't sit idle." The dragon turned its gaze to him, nodding slowly. "You have freed me, human. I will not forget this." The cell door hissed open, interrupting their exchange. A squad of Zalran guards rushed in, their weapons raised. The lead soldier barked a command, and energy beams lanced through the air toward Vorith. "Down!" Elias shouted, diving behind a pile of debris. Vorith roared again, its tail lashing out with incredible speed. The impact sent the guards flying like ragdolls, their weapons clattering to the ground. With a single beat of its wings, the dragon rose into the air, its presence filling the chamber. "Elias," Vorith growled, landing beside him. "Climb on." "What?" Elias blinked, momentarily stunned. "Climb. Now." Elias didn't argue. Scrambling onto Vorith's back, he gripped the dragon's scales tightly as it surged forward, smashing through the cell's reinforced walls as though they were paper. Chaos in the facility. The Zalran detention facility was a labyrinth of corridors and security checkpoints, but Vorith moved through it with terrifying efficiency. Alarms blared, and the facility's guards scrambled to intercept the dragon, but they were hopelessly outmatched. Vorith's claws tore through barricades, and its fiery breath reduced obstacles to molten slag. From his vantage point on Vorith's back, Elias marveled at the creature's raw power. He had seen destruction on the battlefield, but nothing like this. Yet, even amidst the chaos, he couldn't ignore the precision in Vorith's movements. The dragon wasn't acting out of mindless rage, was deliberate, purposeful. "They're deploying reinforcements," Elias shouted, pointing to a group of heavily armed soldiers setting up a blockade ahead. Vorith growled, its wings spreading wide. "Then we will show them the folly of their arrogance." With a powerful leap, Vorith launched itself into the air. The Zalran soldiers opened fire, their energy beams streaking toward the dragon. Elias ducked, clutching the dragon's scales as Vorith twisted mid-flight, evading the attacks with astonishing agility. The dragon swooped low, its claws raking through the barricade and scattering the soldiers like leaves in a storm. Reaching the surface, the pair burst through the final set of doors, emerging into the open air. The facility was located on a barren, wind-swept planet, its surface dotted with jagged rock formations and glowing rivers of molten magma. The Zalran had chosen this desolate location to house their most dangerous weapon, but now that weapon was free. Vorith landed heavily, shaking the ground beneath them. Elias slid off the dragon's back, his legs trembling from adrenaline. "We're not out of this yet," he said, scanning the horizon. The sky above them shimmered as a Zalran dropship descended, its sleek form bristling with weapons. A voice boomed from its external speakers. "Vorith, submit, or we will raise this entire sector." Vorith snarled, smoke curling from its nostrils. They threatened destruction to enforce their tyranny. Typical Zalran. Elias stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Vorith, can you take them down?" The dragon's eyes gleamed. "With your help, human. Their technology is formidable, but it has limits. We must target their engines." Elias nodded, his mind racing. He spotted a pile of debris nearby, scrap metal and discarded machinery from the facility. An idea formed. I can rig an explosive. If you can get me close, I'll plant it on their ship. Vorith lowered its massive head. Then climb once more, Elias Kane. The aerial assault. As Vorith launched into the sky, Elias clung tightly to the dragon's back, the makeshift explosive clutched in his hands. The dropship opened fire, its energy cannons lighting up the sky. Vorith twisted and turned, its movements impossibly graceful for a creature of its size. Hold steady, Elias shouted as they approached the ship. Vorith let out a thunderous roar, diving straight toward the dropship. The maneuver caught the Zauren off guard, their weapons unable to track the dragon's speed. Vorith flew alongside the ship, its claws tearing through one of the wings. Now, Elias, the dragon bellowed. Elias leapt from Vorith's back, landing on the side of the dropship. He scrambled to secure the explosive near the engine, his hands moving with practiced precision despite the chaos around him. The Zauren soldiers inside the ship shouted in alarm, but it was too late. The explosive beeped, its timer ticking down. Elias pushed off the ship, free falling for a terrifying moment before Vorith swooped beneath him, catching him mid-air. The explosive detonated, engulfing the dropship in a fiery inferno. The ship spiraled out of control, crashing into the rocky terrain below. Vorith landed a safe distance away, allowing Elias to slide off its back. The dragon turned to him, its molten eyes filled with something akin to respect. You are brave, human, Vorith said. Foolish, but brave. Elias chuckled, though his hands were still shaking. And you're not as terrifying as I thought. Well, mostly. A new alliance. As the dust settled, Elias and Vorith stood together on the barren plain, the smoldering wreckage of the dropship behind them. The Zauren facility was in ruins, and their forces were scattered. For the first time since his capture, Elias felt a glimmer of hope. What now? Elias asked, looking up at the towering dragon. Vorith spread its wings, the gesture both powerful and majestic. The Zauren will not stop. They will hunt me, as they have always done. But I am no longer their slave. Elias nodded. And I can't go back to the Terran Alliance. Not after this. Then we go forward, Vorith said. Together. You have freed me, Elias Kane. My life is yours, as long as you wish it. Elias smiled faintly. I don't want your life, Vorith. Just your friendship. The dragon let out a low, rumbling laugh. Then you shall have it. As they took to the skies, soaring away from the ruins of the Zauren facility, Elias couldn't help but feel that this was the start of something greater. Together, he and Vorith were no longer prisoners, they were free. And the galaxy would never be the same. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, a brilliant canvas of light and darkness as Vorith and Elias Kane soared through the void aboard a stolen Zauren transport ship. The dragon had curled itself within the ship's massive cargo hold, its golden eyes glowing faintly as it observed the human moving with quiet determination in the cramped cockpit. Elias had commandeered the ship's systems with a combination of resourcefulness and sheer audacity. It wasn't much a bare-bones vessel stripped of most of its advanced weaponry. It was enough to carry them to their next destination, a forgotten sector of space where the Zauren Empire's influence was weakest. We'll need allies, Elias muttered, poring over the navigation charts. If we're going to fight back, we can't do it alone. Vorith's voice rumbled in his mind, low and contemplative. Few would dare stand against the Zauren. They wield fear as their greatest weapon. Then we'll have to find the ones who have nothing left to lose, Elias replied. He glanced over his shoulder at the dragon, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You think anyone's going to listen to a human and an alien dragon? Vorith tilted its head, an almost amused expression flickering across its features. If they do not listen, they will soon see the folly of their choices. The Hidden Haven. Their destination was HFY-7, a desolate moon orbiting a dying star. HFY-7 was a haven for exiles, mercenaries, and outlaws, beings from across the galaxy who had no allegiance except to survival. It was a place where loyalty could be bought, but trust was earned only in blood. As they descended toward the moon's surface, Elias adjusted the ship's scanners. HFY-7's settlements were clustered in deep canyons, hidden from prying eyes and Zalran patrols. The largest of these settlements, Hollow Reach, was their target. Any chance you can fit in without causing a panic? Elias asked, glancing at Vorith. The dragon rumbled, its wings stretching slightly. I am no stealth hunter, human, but I will not cower in shadows. Figured as much, Elias muttered. All right, let's make an entrance. The ship touched down on a precarious landing pad carved into the canyon wall. As Elias and Vorith emerged, the settlement's inhabitants froze, their murmurs rising to a crescendo. A towering alien dragon and a human war medic were not everyday sights, even in a place like Hollow Reach. Elias raised his hands, his voice calm but firm. We're not here to fight. We're here to talk. A figure stepped forward from the crowd, a grizzled alien with cybernetic implants covering half his face. His armor was patched and battle-worn, but the authority in his stance was unmistakable. You've got some nerve showing up here, the alien growled, his gaze flicking to Vorith. That thing is a Zalran weapon. No, Elias said sharply. Vorith is a prisoner, just like the rest of us, and we're here to make sure no one else suffers the way he has. The alien's cybernetic eye whirred as it scanned Elias and Vorith. Talk fast, human. Convince me why I shouldn't toss you both into the nearest pit. Building an alliance. Elias and Vorith were led to a cavernous hall carved into the canyon wall, where the settlement's leaders gathered. The air was thick with tension as Elias stood before them, Vorith looming silently behind him. The Zalran Empire has held this galaxy in a chokehold for centuries, Elias began, his voice steady. They've enslaved worlds, destroyed civilizations, and turned beings like Vorith into tools of war. He gestured to the dragon. But Vorith isn't their weapon anymore. He's free. And with his help, we have a chance to fight back. A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the leaders looked intrigued. Others were openly skeptical. One alien, a feline-like being with sharp teeth and piercing eyes, leaned forward. You're asking us to take on the Zalran? Do you have any idea what they'll do to us if we fail? Elias met her gaze. I know exactly what they'll do. I've seen it. But if we don't stand together, they'll pick us off one by one. They've already done it to countless others. The feline alien narrowed her eyes. And what makes you think we can win? Vorith stepped forward, his massive form casting a shadow over the room. His voice rumbled like thunder. Because I am no longer bound by their chains. And I am not the only one. The room fell silent. Elias took a deep breath. The Zalran have other weapons, other creatures they've enslaved. If we can free them, we'll have a fighting chance. But we need your help to do it. The leaders exchanged glances, their skepticism slowly giving way to determination. The grizzled alien with the cybernetic implants spoke first. All right, human. We'll hear you out. But if you're lying to us, I'm not, Elias said firmly. We're in this together. Striking back. With the support of Hollow Reach, Elias and Vorith began building their resistance. Engineers worked tirelessly to retrofit old ships with new weaponry, while mercenaries trained alongside Vorith, learning how to fight against the Zalran's advanced forces. Elias spent long nights planning their first mission. Raid on a Zalran outpost where several enslaved creatures were held. If they could free them, it would be a decisive blow against the Empire. As they prepared to leave, Elias stood with Vorith at the edge of the canyon, the stars shining above them. You ready for this? Elias asked, his voice quiet. Vorith's molten eyes glowed faintly. I was ready the moment you freed me. Elias smiled. Then let's give them hell. The final battle. The raid on the Zalran outpost was chaos from the start. The resistance forces descended like a storm, their ships weaving through enemy fire as they breached the facility's defenses. Vorith was a force of nature, tearing through walls and disabling enemy turrets with terrifying precision. Elias led a ground team, his medical expertise proving invaluable as they navigated the labyrinthine facility. They found the enslaved creatures beings of incredible power, their bodies scarred from years of torment. Set them free, Elias ordered, his voice ringing with urgency. We're not leaving anyone behind. As the chains fell, the creatures roared their gratitude, joining the fight with ferocity born of vengeance. The Zalran forces, overwhelmed and outmaneuvered, began to retreat. Vorith soared above the battlefield, his roar echoing across the canyon. A new dawn. By the time the battle ended, the Zauran outpost lay in ruins. The resistance forces had claimed their first victory, and the galaxy was beginning to take notice. Elias stood beside Vorith as the sun rose over Hollow Reach, its light casting long shadows across the canyon. The resistance leaders gathered around them, their expressions filled with hope. "This is just the beginning," Elias said. "The Zauran will come for us, but we'll be ready." Vorith lowered his head, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "They will not stand against what we have become." Together, the human and the dragon gazed toward the horizon, their bond unshakable. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, the galaxy had a reason to believe.